A time of war. They invaded our country. So this isn't, in that sense, this is war. In many respects, it's more dangerous than war because, you know, in war they have uniforms. You know who you're shooting at. You know who you're going after.
They invaded our country. No, they didn't. And that's why this matters. That was Donald Trump after he invoked the Alien Enemies Act back in March, claiming there that it was justified because of an invasion of members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, or TDA, operating at the behest of the Venezuelan government under dictator Nicolas Maduro. Now, a new memo from Donald Trump's own National Intelligence Council directly contradicts his claims that the Alien Enemies Act was vital to protect our national security because, as he said there, quote, they invaded our country. In his proclamation announcing he was invoking the Alien Enemies Act, Trump said this: TDA is undertaking hostile actions and conducting irregular warfare against the territory of the U.S., both directly and at the direction, clandestine or otherwise, of the Maduro regime in Venezuela. Now, according to his own intelligence community, that was not the case. Quote, the Maduro regime probably does not have a policy of cooperating with TDA and is not directing TDA movement to and operations in the U.S. Venezuelan security forces have periodically engaged in armed confrontations with TDA, resulting in the killing of some TDA members. Trump also said this, quote, TDA has engaged in and continues to engage in mass illegal migration to the U.S. to further its objectives of harming U.S. citizens. That, too, was contradicted by Donald Trump's own intelligence community. The memo says this, quote, intelligence indicating that regime leaders are directing or enabling Tren de Aragua migration to the U.S. is not credible. It probably would require extensive coordination and funding between regime entities and TDA leaders that we would collect. Now, this damning piece of evidence that Trump's own intelligence community found little evidence for invoking the Alien Enemies Act comes as a second judge ruled that Donald Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act was not, quote, validly invoked since respondents have not demonstrated the existence of a war, invasion, or predatory incursion. Joining our coverage, MSNBC political analyst, host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller. Also joining us, former top official at the Department of Justice, MSNBC legal analyst, Andrew Weissmann. Andrew Weissmann, your reaction.
I want to make sure people understand there are people in jail for potentially the rest of their lives in El Salvador based on the government's actions, sometimes mistakenly, meaning they took the wrong person against an existing court order, that is Mr. Abrego Garcia, where the court is valiantly trying to get him back. But there are plane loads of people who are sitting in prison based on the government invoking the Alien Enemies Act and violating the law because the Supreme Court has said in a 9-0 decision that those people had a right to due process, to be heard. And this document, the one that you have outlined, Nicole, is why. It is a document that shows that their own administration said that there's no way to tie the actions of this gang, even if you can show that the people that you've extracted from this country and shoved into a prison with no due process, even if you can show that they're part of this gang, the law does not apply. And so it's really a lesson to why you want due process, that there's a legal fault here. There's a factual fault here. You have judges in this country, district court judges up to the Supreme Court of the United States saying this is lawless activity. And you now also have a document that shows a lack of candor with the court by the administration when they're standing up trying to invoke this law and saying black is white. And so this is really a remarkable document. But to just begin to end where I began, people are in jail as a result of this. a really egregious error.
Tim Miller, what do you think happens now?
Yeah, we're a little bit in Groundhog Day here, right? Because I agree with every single word that Andrew said there up to the very last one, which was error. And I think error implies it was a mistake, and I don't really think it was. I think that this is what the administration did the first time. This is what they're doing this time, which is Trump wants to do something. They create a series of lies and fabrications and exaggerations to justify or rationalize whatever Trump wants to do. And then they get sued. Then they go to court, and or they have an expert somewhere within the administration, in this case maybe in the Intelligence Department, that writes a memo, right, that is actually knowledgeable about this. It's not trying to backfill whatever insane thing Trump wants to do. And either in court or, in an internal government document, they write what the truth is, which is completely opposite, right? And anybody that knew anything about Venezuela before this knew that Maduro was not directing Tren de Aragua to invade the country, right? And it was a ridiculous lie. So in some ways, this memo is interesting because it's the government admitting it, right? But it's just the government admitting the obvious fact that everybody already knew, which was they were creating this lie to create a rationale to send people to El Salvador because they wanted to do it, because they want to scare people, because they're cruel, for whatever other because Stephen Miller, wasn't hugged as a child, like whatever the rationale is, like that is what was happening here. So what happens now is like we go through the same rigmarole we did every time the first time, which is they're going to lose in court. We wait to see what the Supreme Court says. They stall. They never admit fault. They don't want to bring anybody back. And, they do a tap dance where they're like, well, the court says this, the court says that, but now they're in the custody of Bukele and we can't do anything about it. So I don't know. And the answer is how much pressure can be put on them to fold. If you look back to the first term, like the child separation, eventually they stopped, right? But like the kids that were separated were already separated.
Yeah.
And so I think they probably end up losing here and have to stop doing this. What happens to André and Neri and the people that are in that hole in El Salvador for no reason? I think that's a more complicated question.